Okay, did you want to go ahead and get started, Kristen?
Yeah, terrific.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right, everybody, welcome to our safety planning webinar. This is our first webinar that we're doing this form with Zoom, and so we are very grateful to have you guys all here. And we will be doing some polls at the beginning of this webinar that Kristen has created. And I have also sent you guys some handouts and the PowerPoint beforehand so you guys can work through this webinar with Kristen that she graciously prepared for you guys. So I want to introduce Kristen Carmichael. She is a subject matter expert in regards to domestic violence and safety planning. Kristen is a former domestic violence shelter director and healthcare executive, now operating Carmichael Consultants. She has been absolutely amazing to work with, and I'm super excited to see the safety planning, especially with what's going on with COVID-19. And so I'm going to turn over the floor now to Kristen Carmichael.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Teresa. You've been amazing to work with too, and I've really been looking forward to this. So I can't see all your faces, which makes this a little different than the in-person trainings that I've done before, but still want to get a little bit of input from you throughout the training. I know there's so much expertise in this audience, and I feel like if you all will share some of that via chat, it will enrich the experience for us all. And so there may only be time for questions from time to time, and I may be able to leave a little time for questions at the end. So we may not get to everything that you put in the chat box, but I know you all are on the front line. You're seeing what's happening in your shelters and in your communities and with adults and youth. And so there's going to be opportunities for you to share, and I hope you'll just kind of bust out there like you have here in the beginning and say who you are and what you think and if you have any questions. I love doing safety planning. I know that's a kind of an odd thing, but I'm wild about it and I'm enthusiastic to share what I know with you. The material from this session that you're in is cumulative and will build into the next session. So I'm going to try to get through what I can get through with you in this session. But if you signed up for this session thinking that this session was just like the next one, that is not the case. So if you're interested in signing up to hear what happens in the next session, I really recommend that. And Teresa is going to go ahead and put her email or her contact information so that you can get the link for the next session. So we did not do a great job of making sure that folks knew that the sessions had different material. So please do sign up for the second session if you're in this one. There will be a little bit of overlap, but I think you'll get some good material from each. I have probably enough slides for 3 PowerPoints and 3 sessions. So we're going to kind of cruise through stuff today at a fast pace, but hopefully a pace that's comfortable to you all. Yeah, we'll just kind of get into it. On a personal note, let me say I think it's very odd to be doing domestic violence safety planning specific to pandemic. It's a strange place that I think we all find ourselves in this environment where we're working and trying to help people. You know, I think we're all in this together, and anything I can do to be of support, that's what I'd like to do for you today and beyond today. So my email is listed here. The work that I'm doing now in consulting really is helping organizations transition into using digital products. So telehealth, Zoom, I know many of you have already started moving into these kind of platforms to help survivors of abuse. I also help organizations do program planning, just lots of different kinds of support and training. So before we get any further into the material, I would like to ask Teresa we're going to do 3 polls for you to answer questions within, and this will give me the information I need to really tailor this presentation to you. since I can't see your faces and see how this is registering. So this is our first poll, and this really is specific to those of you who are working in domestic violence agencies with residential services. So if you wouldn't mind quickly reading over this and inputting your answer, we will move on to the second poll question as quickly as possible.
Okay, I think we're good on that one. I'm gonna go ahead and open the next one.
And did you see the results, Teresa? Because I didn't see it on my screen.
Yes, if everybody can please take a vote. There's only 30 out of 68 people that did this voting. I'm gonna give it at least another minute or so to make sure that everybody is voting.
Okay, and I think that's okay because a number of folks on this webinar aren't employed within domestic violence shelters.
Perfect.
So that's okay. I'm just wondering, does it seem like there's some increase and some decrease across the state?
Yes, so apparently there is a 20% people have voted that yes, large increase in demand for shelter services. There's a 20%, 25% increase for yes, small increase in demand for shelter services. 13% voted yes, large decrease in demand for shelter services. 16% yes, small decrease in demand for shelter services, and 19% of people voted that no, same demand as before COVID-19 concerns. So,
okay, terrific. Let's put that next poll question up. And that reflects what I've been hearing from other folks, that some shelters are seeing an increase and some are seeing a real decrease. And so we're kind of all over the map with that right now. Thank you. I see the results now.
perfect. All right. Okay, give me 1 second. All right, so let's go on to the second one. Okay, it looks like voting has slowed down. I'm gonna go ahead and end the polling and show you guys the results.
So I don't see the results. I'm not sure if the others do.
As attendings are now viewing the poll results.
Okay. Can you tell me what they were?
Sure. So 76% voted that yes, we have a platform to do audio and video communication with clients. 24% voted yes, we are offering text messaging. 17% voted yes, we are offering chat messaging. And 20% voted that no, we don't have any capability at this time.
Okay. So last poll.
Okay, there you go. This is the last poll.
And I don't see it, Teresa, but maybe the participants do.
Let me do it one more time.
Okay.
Can everybody see?
I see it.
Perfect. There we go. Okay, it looks like it has slowed down a bit. This is probably one of the quicker questions.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna end the polling and show you guys all the results. And it's very, I'm grateful that you guys are posting in the chat so I can see if you guys can see it or not. So let me know if you guys are having any issues. Okay, the results are being shared now. Let me know if you can see it.
Do you mind speaking to them, Teresa, and just saying what they are?
Sure. So the question is, for all webinar participants, could you use more support in implementing digital communication with your organization or practice? 84% stated yes, and 16% stated no.
Okay, terrific. All right, let's go ahead and get deeper into the presentation. That gives me a lot of really good information. Thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts on these things. I think we're kind of building the airplane in mid-flight, and so I want to make sure that I'm speaking to things that are of interest to you and pertinent to what you're seeing on the ground. Okay, so moving forward, these are the objectives for today, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them because hopefully we'll be busy achieving them. But really, it's how can we enhance and kind of broaden your view of what safety planning is and give you some real tools to be using with your clients. And I apologize if I interchange the word client and patient. I work an awful lot in healthcare, and so I can see that happening today, but we'll just keep on going. Also, looking at some strategies specific to the environment we're living in today, where there is this public health crisis. And then, again, getting some more concrete strategies under your belt that you can be using in a different framework, maybe, to think about safety planning. And so I want to start just reflecting a little bit briefly on what safety planning, what the goal of safety planning is, what it's here to do. And I ended up looking up safety, and I thought these synonyms were very telling for what safety is and what safety planning potentially can do. And I wonder if any of these words are jumping out to you that maybe you hadn't equated with safety. And if you'll just put in the chat box any word that seems meaningful to you on this list. And I see in the chat box that some of you aren't working in a shelter. That's fine. This presentation will help anyone who has some kind of contact with survivors where they're wanting to help them with their safety. Okay, and I'm seeing some of you put in the chat box, security, safeness, sanctuary, absolutely. Freedom, that's the one that jumped out to me. Yeah, refuge. So this concept of safety really is core to many of the services and much of what I think we hope to share with our clients. Peace, absolutely. And another thing that jumped out to me in thinking about safety in this presentation for you all today is just how this virus, COVID-19, is also impacting our feelings of safety, our feelings of freedom, immunity, refuge, sanctuary. And so it's an interesting time to be attempting to safety plan with survivors when we ourselves are feeling our safety infringed on. And so how can we go about doing this thing in partnership with our clients in this, really heightened environment of difficulty? And, I want to move to a second question off this slide, which is, why do you believe that we do safety planning? I mean, what is it that we hope to accomplish? And so I'll give you a second to think about what is the purpose of safety planning. I know for some of your organizations where you work, it may be a requirement that you do safety planning. And so sometimes it can potentially feel like you're checking a box, that it's not something that you maybe are invested in the same way as you could be because it's forced on you and this client in a short amount of time, perhaps. And I have to say, when I was a case manager doing safety planning with clients in a residential shelter, oftentimes it felt like I couldn't get enough space or enough time or enough quiet to really do justice to what needed to be accomplished. And so I think safety planning sometimes gets a bad rap when if we could create those kinds of conditions, it's really a chance to partner and shift dynamics. So in my mind, and I see some of you writing in the chat box, and I agree, it's a chance for defense and independence and to help people survive. And when we talk about surviving for victims of domestic violence, we oftentimes jump to thinking about a physical survival so that they aren't killed or aren't physically harmed. And I want to kind of broaden our perspective on what it means to really survive emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And sometimes I've seen where our safety planning can get stuck in trying to prevent a physical attack. And that makes sense because we certainly don't want our clients to be harmed physically, but how do we also help our clients plan such that we're incorporating things that bring overall wellness to our clients through our safety planning, as well as joy and happiness and the ability to thrive. I mean, one thing that has struck me about safety planning over and over and over is that if our clients' lives are worse after they leave their offenders than before when they were with them, we're really setting them up for failure. And there's a lot of things that go into what could make a survivor's life better, or bring them more safety, more freedom, more defense. And a piece of it is how we encourage them or partner with them to think about their safety. So are we encouraging them to take an active role in protecting themselves and their families? Are we encouraging them to be empowered within the safety planning? Or are we falling back occasionally, or more than occasionally, on us trying to take the lead or trying to tell them how to be safe? And that's, you know, I see in the chat box somebody writing self-efficacy, and I couldn't agree more. You know, how do we help them appreciate that safety planning can be a paradigm shift for them? You know, whereas when they were with their offender, or even if they're still with their offender, in many ways that abusive person may be calling the shots in what happens in the home or outside the home. But the kinds of strategies we work with survivors on to safety plan are things that are within their control, and where they get to assess maybe areas of vulnerability, and they get to be proactive instead of reactive to what's happening to them. I hope that it's a significant shift in thinking, and a really empowering one. So in the best of worlds, I think that's what safety planning can accomplish. And I didn't always understand that, and I did an awful lot of bad safety planning with survivors over the years, and I did it with the best of intentions, you know, thinking that I had expertise that they didn't have, and I did have some expertise that they didn't have, but they also had expertise I didn't have. And so, you know, how do we really create that partnership and help put the survivor in the place where they should be, of making their own plans and making their own choices and taking their power back. So that's my little spiel about how I feel about safety planning and why we do it. I do want to speak to, and I appreciate you guys continuing to put things in the chat box. I'm not keying off each of them, but you know, this idea that we're all teaching each other and we're all kind of coming through this together is really important. The next piece of this slide, the last piece of this slide, is just around risk. I wonder if you all have ever taken a moment or thought to yourself, oh my goodness, you know, the stakes are so high for my client to be able to protect themselves and their children, and anything I offer or anything we come up with together potentially could create more risk for this person. And that weighs heavy. I mean, certainly we're working with survivors of abuse and potentially their children because we care about them and we want to reduce the risk. But anytime you shift things, there is the potential for change, and for, you know, there is the potential for greater risk. And to admit that to ourselves, that we are trying to be catalysts for change in someone's life, and we hope for the better. And we go into it with those feelings of, you know, trying to create some solutions together. But there is inherent risk to what we're doing. And how I view risk in safety planning is that if we do nothing, so if we allow things to continue as they are, you know, research and statistics tell us that the abuse gets worse over time. So not doing anything is an option, and it's not a good one. And so for those reasons, I think trying something together You know, as long as it's done in good faith and it's something that the survivor is choosing, and we're, you know, we're doing our best to come up with good solutions together, even if it leads to, or there is an element of physical danger to it, that it is preferable to leaving things alone and survivors feeling isolated and like they can't reach out and that they can't use their power to protect themselves. So I hope that makes sense. But we are inserting ourselves to create change. Okay. So the next slide is, this is kind of a, y'all know how to safety plan. I think that's what I'm trying to say with this slide. Everyone safety plans. Safety planning is not just for survivors of domestic violence. It's something that whole communities do, that even animals do. So this is something that is within our nature to do. And I'm not saying it's always easy, but I am saying that this is something that happens all the time and that we do for ourselves. So, you know, with a castle, the safety planning is when somebody attacks you, you're going to raise the drawbridge, and that's a means for protection, and everyone knows it, and we're all on the same page, and that's what we're going to do. With the water buffalo, if there's a predator or a threat, they surround, they form a circle around their babies. And so that's something that they've come to know that will protect them. And, you know, with a hurricane, people are going to put shutters on their homes. They're going to close the shutters on their homes. And I was actually talking to Jeanette Baca last night. I don't know if you know her. She does an awful lot of work for the coalition about this lungfish. And at the possibility of you all thinking I'm ridiculous, I'll just say there's this animal called a lungfish, and it when there's no rain and when all the water dries up, it burrows down into the mud and can live in the mud for months and months, and even up to, I think, 2 years until the rain comes again. And when the rain comes again, it has shut down all of its functions that it can, but it comes back to life. And Jeanette was sharing with me that in New Mexico, there's a certain kind of frog, and she owned a ranch. And when the rains came for a couple of days, these frogs would turn up. So I don't know if any of you all know about the New Mexican frog that does really good safety planning. If you do, put the name of the frog into the chat box and I'll tell Jeanette. But yeah, I mean, it reminds me of with survivors now and you all answering that poll about, you know, some of your shelters are experiencing an increase in demand and some a decrease. And I'm guessing that for the decrease, there are many survivors who are hesitant to come into shelter now or to seek that kind of resource due to the virus and their concern around potentially being exposed to it. And so we'll get into this within our training today, but how do we do safety planning for survivors who won't be leaving their offender imminently and who are going to try to ride this out at home? What does that look like for them? And I've seen some advocates who really don't know how to safety plan for folks unless they are leaving their offender. And that's sad for me because there's an awful lot of opportunity for survivors to become safer within whatever situation they're in. I mean, I'll give you some strategies that even if the survivor is in the same room with the offender, there are things that they can be doing to be safer, both physically and emotionally. And, you know, a survivor cannot be 100% safe in that home with their offender. But that's maybe not what we should expect to achieve in those types of situations. You know, it's a safer environment for them, even if it's not 100% safe. And lastly on my list is just with this pandemic and this virus, I know we're all doing an awful lot to try to keep ourselves safe, you know, with hand washing and hygiene. And some of us kind of sheltering in place, sheltering at home. And so, you know, needing to be safe and needing someone to help you be safe and needing to have a plan is pervasive. And something many of you all have had an awful lot of experience with helping folks with. I'm going to pause for just a second. If you have any particular questions, we're going on to a little bit different content now. So please feel free to use your chat box if any of this is feeling discordant to you or bringing up any questions for you. So I'm not seeing any imminent questions, and I maybe didn't give you enough time to input them, so I'm sorry if I'm pushing too fast. We can certainly come back. But I want to bring up something of great importance, which is how we enter a space with a client to be able to do safety planning. You know, even if it's informal safety planning or it's not something that we've set an hour to do, kind of where are we at emotionally when we're attempting to do this? And so I wonder if you can take a minute for yourselves now and think about how many of you are within your resilient zone. You know, within your nervous system here today, how many of you feel like you are in a place of calm and a place of really being able to receive information, feeling balanced, and this is something that takes work anytime, but maybe particularly during this time. You know, being able to be in this resilient zone is not something that happens automatically. It's by virtue of choice that we keep ourselves here. And, you know, when we are able to achieve this, there's this Zen Buddhist saying about being like water over rocks. And when I look at this slide, I think about, you know, these looking like little waves, like little water over rocks. So when we face difficulty, you know, that we can slide up and above and over it and to the other side with some ease when we're in this zone. One more thing about being here when we're safety planning with clients is someone says, wake up in the resilience zone. Yes, absolutely. A lot of us wake up there, and then if you're anything like me, you get on the phone, you look at the news, and then you're into the next slide, which I'll show you the next slide here in a minute. So yes, this is, I hope you're waking up in the resilience zone and then you're able to maintain it. That's kind of where I run off the rails. But yeah, when we're here, we can do executive functioning. We can think big picture. We can do multiple steps in the future. We can be creative. We can embrace challenge. We can embrace gray area. So we're not doing black or white thinking. We can see that there's gray area. And I wonder if you'd be willing to share with the other people on the webinar what it is during this time that you're doing to stay in your resilience zone. So I'll tell you a couple of things that I'm doing while you put these into the chat. But I'm always looking for new strategies. So some of the things I'm doing are the 3 deep breaths, because my breaths can get really shallow, and then you know, I'm bumping out of my resilient zone. I really like a website called Upworthy, which has good news, the good news of the day. There's an awful lot of bad news these days, but it shares the good news. I'm listening to some classical music these days to calm myself down. No more hip hop, not for a while. And then I'm at dinner time, my family's sharing things that we're grateful for. Those are some things that we're doing. We also just got a batch of 5 baby chicks, and so we're going to embark upon raising some chickens, which I'm a little nervous about, but they're certainly cute, and it is really keeping our mind off stuff. So that's what I'm up to. I'm raising chickens. Okay, it looks like Jennifer shared that she's doing some yoga. Yeah, that's awesome. That is wonderful for chilling out. Exercise, yes, thank you. Reassessing at the end of the week and seeing what worked and what didn't. That is so smart. And then making adjustments. Love it. More exercise. Good on you, Brooke. Mountain biking, sunshine, absolutely. Now is the time to buy a hammock. If you can get your hands on a hammock, that is the way to survive this. Gardening, walking, hiking, wonderful. Yep, taking time with family when possible. Yep, fishing, nice. So it's wonderful. And, you know, this is a chance for us to remind ourselves how important these things are, especially as folks who are trying to be helpers within this environment that we're in. So terrific. Now let's see. This is what happens when we don't do enough fishing and hiking and meditation and time in nature. So this is what can happen with a traumatic event, but this can also happen with kind of repeated stress over time. And that's what I'm concerned about with advocates of all different types, or counselors, helpers today, is that with the additional stress in the environment, plus the stress that may come from your jobs, depending on how you're handling that, that we can get bumped out of our resilient zone. And so when that happens, we can suffer from what's called hyperarousal or hypoarousal, so going too fast, going too slow. And, you know, we can experience anxiety, sleeplessness, eating too much, eating too little, sweating. There's all kinds of impacts for us if we get into this zone. And I can do a whole presentation on self-care and really on the neurobiology of trauma. But the reason I bring it up to you today is just when we go into safety planning, we're often thinking about what we're going to offer the client or how the client is going to be responding. But for us to take a minute to think about what we're bringing to that interaction, and are we bringing our best self, or are we bringing someone in this place of dysregulation? And then, you know, just another question for you that if you can input into the chat quickly, you know, if we bring this dysregulation to the safety planning and the client is also dysregulated, which is really to be expected considering what's been happening in their life, you know, what are the impacts on our ability to produce a quality safety plan that has any sort of meaning? And, you know, I think of this dysregulation as being kind of like radiation. So, you know, when you've been exposed to radiation and you get around other people, you can communicate that to them. You can transmit that to them. And so if our clients are coming to us with this, it's really up to us to hold the line of staying in our resilient zone and kind of letting them borrow our nervous system for a minute so that they can take in the information and be really thoughtful about how they plan. You know, if we're in a state of black and white thinking and we're just thinking, gosh, how do we solve this? How do we fix this? And we're not being creative and embracing the gray area, and supporting our client in that way, you know, it can't work. I guess the gist of it is it can't work for both folks to be in this tough place and think that you'll get a good result from your safety planning. And I have worked in shelters and other organizations where it's really tough to stay in your resilient zone all day long. And certainly there's some strategies for doing that. And I hope that your employers are helping you with that. I think your employer should meet you halfway in setting up different processes and ways for you to come out of difficult situations and re-regulate. But just going from client to client in this unregulated state can have a lot of harm to you and to the folks you're working with. And a lot of very good intentioned people do that because I don't know that they know there's another alternative where it's not supported enough within their organization. So this is kind of the part we own in the safety planning. This is one of the things we own, is how we come into that safety planning session. And there are things you can do to work with your clients when they are dysregulated, as they inevitably will be. I mean, I wonder about, you know, I've gone on walks with clients to do safety planning, certainly offering them something to drink before you start safety planning, finding a quiet space, making them comfortable. Again, maybe getting them outside to do this, or doing an activity together before you do this that is regulating, coloring a picture, or, you know, but how we start the session really sets the stage for what comes after that, if that makes sense. Okay. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about, I know many of you work in the domestic violence field, but some of you do not. And so before we get too much farther into this presentation, I just want to have us kind of reiterate what types of abuse our clients are experiencing. So if you will put into the chat box, and I'm going to wait so you have a second, but please put into the chat box the different types of abuse that you're aware of. You know, what comes to mind first when I say domestic violence and types of abuse? Financial abuse, yep, absolutely. Physical, emotional, financial, And really, when I give presentations about domestic violence, the first thing folks, sexual abuse, the first thing folks think of usually is the physical component. But yes, these other components, emotional and mental abuse, thank you, Jessica. Digital cyber abuse, so using IT, emotional, verbal, physical, financial, yes, excellent. So I can tell I'm talking to a professional audience. Sometimes I do these presentations for just general communities, or, you know, HR people or whatever, and so you guys know your stuff, and I appreciate that. But I just want to make sure that, you know, we're seeing the whole spectrum of abusive behaviors, religious, spiritual abuse, yes. So there's many components to abuse, and when offenders are looking to kind of prep a victim for abuse, they're using a lot of different strategies. Now, when we talk about offenders, we know that the majority of those folks were people who were abused as kiddos, and so they were taught over time that this is how to maintain a relationship. And so offenders tend to use strategies that they learned as kids, and also strategies that are specific and will work with the type of victim that they have a relationship with. And so these different types of abuse, which you all were so good, yes, control, absolutely, Lisa, you all were so good to put into the chat box, they are a means to an end. So the reason for these things is to maintain that power and control, and offenders are strategic in the ways that they deploy them. So just to reinforce that they are specializing the abuse, let me put to you, you know, for a victim of abuse who is an immigrant to this country, there's a vulnerability there that an offender could seize on that's different than, say, if I were to be abused, and different from, say, somebody with a certain kind of disability could be have a different vulnerability. So offenders may be using tools that they learned as children, but they're also specializing the abuse to who they're with. So for that survivor who's an immigrant to this country, you know, a threat of deportation would be a very effective tool, potentially, against them, whereas against me, that's not how it would work. And say a survivor with a certain kind of disability, say they're homebound, or they can't feed themselves, or they need help bathing, or whatever that looks like, an offender could certainly key off of that perceived vulnerability in order to get what they want from that person, in order to kind of break them down and control them. Threatening not to take them to the doctor or not to give them their medicine or to cut them off financially, or, you know, lots of opportunity there for offenders to you know, box in survivors. One other type of abuse that I want to talk about, I'm passionate about it, and you'll see at the bottom of this slide, there's a link, is a type of abuse I call enticement. And I bet you already know what it is, and you hear about it all the time from survivors, and it kind of gelled in a certain way for me, which is why I did this TED Talk, which I hope you'll check out when you can. But it's really, you know, when offenders are doing things that look nasty, that look awful, that look harmful, like physical abuse or sexual abuse or threats or verbal abuse. I mean, we can see that and know that that's abuse and that that's not right, and it kind of shakes us in that way. But unfortunately, offenders can also be the opposite of that in order to maintain the relationship, in order to keep the relationship intact. And we oftentimes don't consider that abusive. And it's not always conscious, I think, that offenders are doing these things, sometimes maybe. But I wonder if you know of any examples that you've seen with your clients where offenders have done what looks like the opposite of abuse. So things that are charming, things that appear kind, things that on the surface look like that's who they really are, and at times they certainly are, but that serve the function of manipulation, serve the function of keeping together this abusive relationship, keep the survivor hoping beyond hope that this relationship can get better. If you have any examples of what you've seen offenders do to keep the relationship together, maybe they've gone too far, they introduce physical abuse for the first time and the survivor is thinking about leaving them, you know, what might an offender do in order to encourage that survivor to stay with them? If you can put that in the chat box, that would be super helpful. And I can certainly give you some examples that I've seen from my time too. Okay, so Lisa's saying codependency. Stephanie, yes, definitely gifts. Honeymoon stage, yeah. So that was, yes, I remember that there was, anyway, there used to be stages that we talked about. Honeymoon stage is one of them. Promises, definitely won't ever happen again. I don't think I ever talked to a survivor of abuse that wasn't told it won't happen again, at least 100 times. And it does happen again, and that's the problem. Oh, the offenders volunteering to go to counseling, promises it won't happen again, using the children as leverage, definitely. So taking the kids to a ball game and, you know, we're going to be a happy family again, apologizing for sure, threats of self-harm. I'll kill myself if you leave me. Please don't do this. You know, it'll never happen again. Take them on a fancy date and flowers. So yes, Rusty, absolutely. And the thing is, who knows you better than your partner? You know, your partner knows so much about you that, let's take, for example, what Rusty wrote in here about flowers. You know, your partner can know what your favorite flower is and can send it to your office, where before the pandemic, your friends could ooh and ah over it and tell you how lucky you are. So there are so many opportunities for offenders to specialize the abuse and to do things that are meaningful to survivors, but in many ways are a trick. So just to kind of give you some information about enticement, because earlier in my career, I didn't see that as abuse. And I think many times that's tricky for survivors to decode. Like, why is this offender also my best friend? Why is this offender also doing these kind things? And some of it is part of the push and pull that keeps people stuck in these relationships, and not necessarily means that this person, you know, rarely means that there will be long-term change. Okay, so thank you all so much for helping enrich this discussion. One other piece of this is just how the virus and this environment that we're living in today may be impacting the types of abuse offenders are using. And you all have been so good to put so much into this discussion. I'm just going to say, I mean, some of the places where I see that offenders are likely keying off, and you may already be hearing this from your clients, is you know, these shelter-in-place orders already are creating so much isolation. So offenders keying off that to kind of restrict even more contact that survivors may have. Certainly the financial abuse may ratchet up. Medical abuse, so offenders calling the shots about who gets to go to the doctor, who doesn't, medication, that kind of stuff. Also potentially more threats to leave or kick the survivor out, where they might feel more vulnerable during this time. And really just an increase in fear mongering that the offender could be doing with the survivor, really in a lot of different areas. So Lisa's put in kind of taking the children, yes. And you know, the effect that this then has is to enhance how toxic these relationships are during this time. And data also tells us that during times of tragedy or times of enhanced stress, domestic violence tends to go up. And so we can expect that that is happening across our state and across the country. And really, I've read articles across the world that this has been on the rise. Okay. Oh, so Molly says threatening to infect the survivor. Yeah. So an awful lot of impacts for folks we care about. Okay. So I want to give you a few minutes, really a very few minutes, I'm sorry, to look over this kind of case study. And there's not going to be a quiz on this, so you don't need to memorize it. But I just want to give us kind of a hypothetical person to think about as we continue to talk about safety planning, because it's awful hard to just talk about safety planning without it being grounded in anything. So let me give you a few minutes to read over this and take this in. And Teresa, while folks are reading this, I hope you're still on the other end here, but I wonder if you could make sure to put your email into the chat box. Maybe you already did. I'm sorry if I missed it. But in case folks want to sign up for the second session, hopefully we haven't scared anyone away yet. Just in case people weren't able to sign up for the second session and might like to, that session will be going from 12:30 to 2 p.m. today.
Absolutely. I'll go ahead and put in my email, and then I will, if you contact me via email, I will send you the registration link for the second one. There is a capacity of 100 people, but I think we have enough room for the second one for whoever would like to attend.
Terrific. Thank you so much. All right. If you have finished reading this little case study, will you just put Y into your chat box? And if not, put N. And I'll give you a little more time, but I don't want you to be hanging out being bored. Okay. All right. I'm getting lots of whys. We're going to keep on checking. So, a few questions for you. Thank you, guys. In thinking about Sarah's situation, how might I wrote that case study before we had this public health crisis, and I thought about changing it for this presentation, but I thought it was interesting, actually, the juxtaposition between how Sarah's situation might have been before and how it might be today. So can you pinpoint any differences between how things would be today, how things would be different? And I'm going to go back so that you can look at it again. And if you'll just put in your chat box anything different that might be happening to Sarah today, if that makes sense. Yeah, likely wouldn't be able to leave home to do the babysitting. And I think I was thinking she was bringing the kids into her house to do the babysitting, but that's not going to happen either, right? Yeah. And Anthony would be home a lot more, right? Definitely. Sarah would be more isolated because she's not babysitting and she's not bringing in the money either, right? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Those are some big changes. But I'm guessing that the types of abuse that Anthony is using would be very similar. So instead of being jealous of potentially her students' fathers, the interaction with the students' fathers, it may be jealousy over any perceived interaction with the mailman, or, you know, the jealousy doesn't just go away because the students' fathers aren't around. I mean, it morphs into something else, but usually something pretty similar. So even though Sarah's situation would be different in some ways, the abuse would still be going on and potentially would be worse, especially if, like Stephanie said, Anthony's home all the time now, right? Could start becoming jealous of the baby. I like that. Yeah, that's possible. So a second question about this case study is, what types of abuse did you run across within this case study? So we talked about the different types of abuse, you know, threats, physical abuse, emotional abuse, physical violence, financial. Okay, so I'm already seeing you guys are on this. So within this short case study, you're seeing a lot of different kind of facets of abuse. Yes, verbal, threats, emotional, financial, and some pretty serious abuse, particularly when Anthony gets out the gun and is cleaning it. So to even have a gun in the house is a lethality factor, so that can speak to the chances this could lead to really serious physical harm and even death. And the last question for you to think about with this case study is, you know, if within safety planning we only offer to her, you need to call 911, which is a pretty common safety planning component that some people just offer over and over and over again without understanding a survivor's situation or what the survivor wants to do. But if we just kind of lob that at Sarah, you know, in this case, you know, what do we think would happen if Sarah had called 911 on Anthony after he had been cleaning his gun? And I've had the opportunity to think this through with a number of different groups. And this is not to bring any kind of criticism or negative critique on law enforcement, but just from a survivor perspective, even if Sarah is able to call 911, particularly in this environment, you know, what that likely would result in is a wait, an undetermined wait of, say, 5 minutes to 30 minutes, depending on where she lives, during which time Anthony has access to her and knows that she's called the police. And so he's either really abusing her or maybe enticing her not to tell the police what happened. Then law enforcement gets there. It's relatively easy and quick, and I've done this with audiences too, where they are encouraged to be Anthony for just a minute and come up with an excuse. So likely Anthony will have thought of an excuse by the time law enforcement gets there, and probably a good one. And so by the end of all of this commotion, what is likely to occur is law enforcement offering to give Sarah a ride somewhere else. And so if that were to happen, and it may happen in such a way that she's not offered to take her children, you know, by the end of all of this, would Sarah leave her kids? And I would certainly hope not. But is that a good result? You know, after all of this, she's offered to be given a ride. Or let's say under some extreme case, Anthony is taken to jail, say for a night or two, and then returns to this family. You know, did that make this family safer? Does it increase Sarah's amount of resource that she has if this were to happen again? Does Sarah now feel like she can use 911 in the future? I mean, all of these are questions that come up. And so seeing that gray area of what really does enhance safety and what is just something we might throw at a survivor because it's a knee-jerk reaction. You know, and I'm not saying any of you all do this, but how can we be really thoughtful about the planning? Right, and so, you know, I see Lisa saying maybe there needs to be an order of protection, and that's another safety planning strategy that works in certain situations and not in other situations. So how do we go about determining, is this the right situation for us to be pursuing that with our clients or not? Because there are some offenders, and it's a certain personality type and a certain type of offender that sees an order of protection like a red cape to a bull. And an order of protection can make survivors less safe if it is that kind of an offender. So let's keep on busting, because I think the point is, I should know the point I'm presenting, but I think the point is that certain strategies are great in certain situations and awful in others, and it can be the same strategy. So how do we help survivors pick those strategies when some work for some people and some work for others? And we have some answers to that. Okay. So I'll put this out to you about what comes to mind for you about what you would tell Sarah to do to increase her safety. So thinking about Sarah and her situation again, you know, if she were to come into your shelter or your counseling center, or you had some interaction with her, what would you do for her? What kinds of options would you offer? So I'll let you think about that for just a second. And some organizations have lists of options where they're just kind of indiscriminate to who the survivor is and what their situation is. They're offering the same options over and over and over again. And so we can see what some of those are. And there's some value to knowing what some very common options are, like an order of protection or like going to counseling. So there's some value to knowing what your options are, but where I think we make mistakes is when we just try to put a square peg into a round hole. So we just give the same options to survivors no matter what their situation is. That in my mind is not real safety planning. And it can be quick to do that, and it's certainly easier than what I'm going to propose that you do. But I think we make mistakes when we do that, and we make assumptions about people that may not be true, and we can fracture our relationship with that survivor who knows they're not going to do 2/3 of the things on the list for very good reasons. So these are the common safety planning strategies that I see being offered to survivors after they have broken up with an offender, which some of the survivors we serve have broken up with an offender and some have not. But going to a shelter, which in today's environment, we cannot assume that people will feel safe doing that. And even before this, we couldn't assume that people would feel safe doing that for lots of reasons. Getting an order of protection, calling 911, trying to avoid Anthony in the community, not going back to their home unless they have a safety standby, making sure to collect documents they need before they leave. These are very common. And these tend to be the types of strategies that get offered if the survivor is not leaving the relationship. Now, these strategies are offered by some advocates who will even try to do this kind of safety planning. There are other advocates that I have seen that just kind of throw their hands up in the air because they think if Sarah won't leave her offender, that there's no way to do safety planning. And that's not true. So there's lots of ways that we can work with survivors before they leave an offender. And so some of the most common ones are telling her to pack a bag and have her bag stashed somewhere so that when she is ready to leave, she can get out of the house. This one, which I don't like, and we can talk about why, but the idea of not getting beat in certain areas of the house. Mainly, I hear folks say, try not to get beat up in the kitchen because that's where the knives are, or, you know, not in the bathroom because there's usually not an exit. So other strategies are teaching the kiddos how to get out and call for help, calling 911, making code word with a friend. So if you're in trouble, then you call the friend and use the code word, and then the friend's home and they answer the phone and then they call the police. I mean, it's, and keeping evidence of the abuse is also one that I hear that I think is actually can be helpful depending on if survivors feel comfortable doing that. And depending on if there is evidence of the abuse. You know, not all survivors are being abused physically or in ways that they can keep evidence of. Okay, so I'm gonna let's see what's going on with this chat over here. Yeah, okay, so Francesca is saying, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name, that if she couldn't get away, I'd tell her to watch for triggers that her abuser had, attempt to de-escalate the situation, don't allow herself to be cornered, assess what supports and options she already has. Yes, Michelle, I like that one. So now comes the part where we get to like think about these recommendations, and the recommendations we just went over, I see them on websites all the time as being the things you should offer survivors. But I want us to take a minute to think about how helpful they really are. So the first one about not getting beat in certain rooms, or the idea that you can get your offender, you can leave your offender somewhere before they physically abuse you, is rarely the case. I'm not going to say it's never happened, but it's rarely the case. And it also can make the survivor feel in some ways bad if they weren't able to get out of the kitchen, or they weren't able to get out of the bathroom and their offender beat them up anyway. I mean, the other piece of that is I had a survivor tell me, I don't want to get out of the kitchen when I'm getting beat up because I may need to grab a knife. And so I think we're underestimating our client's agency within that situation and their ability to know what's right for them. And we're also putting an awful lot of responsibility on them during an event that likely they didn't do anything to start. I mean, the offender will key in that they did something, but they likely didn't do anything, and that they can't, and many cannot control. So I'm not a fan of the, like, try to only get beat in the garage or the foyer, or I don't know what, but I don't like that one. And it's common, and I'm sure at some point in my career I've offered it. So please don't feel bad if this is one that you've used. The packing a bag, I think, is a terrific safety planning strategy for some survivors who feel comfortable doing it. who want to select that option. I think it can help them get into a psychological space of thinking about what it will be like when they're gone and what they will need. And so kind of projecting them into this future without the offender. There is some safety there around where you would put the bag, and you know, there's some safety around that, but I like that one, and I think that's one that can work with certain survivors. Again, establishing a code word with a friend sounds very proactive, and in a way it is, and it, you know, helps the survivor feel resourced. It is, again, around thinking that she has some control during a potentially explosive moment, which she likely does not know when that's going to crop up, and have the time to go call her friend, use a code word, hope the friend answers, and then hope that the friend knows how to intervene constructively. So again, when we kind of break it down and think it through, it has real potential to let a survivor down. And again, it's not that I would never suggest it, but it's weighing what works for that person and really listening to them about what's worked in the past and what they might try in the future. So calling police, that's a really polarizing one. And that's one that gets offered all the time. And, you know, we as advocates may want our clients to call the police. Many times I found myself wishing my client would call the police. But survivors many times don't feel comfortable calling the police for a litany of reasons. And so us being open to that, not going on a safety plan, I mean, we have to enter these conversations with survivors wanting to encourage the types of strategies that they believe will work for them. And there are many survivors who will not want that on their safety plan. They may not tell us that, and so when we put it on there, you know, they'll let us do it, but they may not really see that as a resource. And then, you know, there are some that will. And so again, that balancing act that we need to do. Getting an order of protection, we talked a little bit about that. That's a great resource for certain survivors and not others. Not going certain places where your offender might intercept you. I used that safety strategy an awful lot to help cut off access to the survivor. And that works for offenders who might physically abuse the survivor, and also for offenders who are looking to emotionally abuse a survivor or entice them back. So it's a great strategy, but how you want to be careful with it is if you suggest not going any of these places that the survivor regularly goes. I mean, if you think about how that is for you right now, not going all these places where you regularly go and how that feels, you can create more isolation for that survivor than maybe even when they were in that abusive relationship. And so, again, this notion of like, how do we make survivors' lives better instead of making them more difficult? So if she really needs to have some spiritual support and belongs to a faith community, maybe we do encourage her not to go to church at the same time on the same day. But how can we keep that connection, and maybe, you know, she's able to attend a Bible study, or once during the pandemic, maybe there's a web link that she can follow so that she can still participate in that community. I hope that makes sense. So again, this traditional safety planning, these ideas that likely many of you have used, are good in certain circumstances and not good in others. And that's really kind of the message I'm trying to deliver to you today, is a chance to think them through and think of some other safety planning that might work better in their place. So you're going to get this PowerPoint, or I think Teresa already has sent this to you, and I'm going to skip over a little bit of this material. It goes more in depth into what traditional safety planning tends to be good at, but it tends to focus on preventing physical abuse or mitigating physical abuse. So like, don't get beat in certain rooms, have a code word, call 911. Those all revolve around what to do if your offender is coming after you physically. And physical abuse is an important type of abuse that offenders use, but it's not the only one. And so in many ways, we need to learn from offenders about how to help survivors. So if offenders are breaking down survivors in a bunch of different areas, emotionally and spiritually, how are we helping survivors kind of fill in those holes? And how is our safety planning reflective of the many ways that abusive people are kind of taking a chunk out of our client, if that makes sense? And these are kind of the reasons why that traditional safety planning oftentimes falls short for our clients. Another piece of why really responding strongly but almost exclusively to physical abuse and safety planning, another reason why that isn't enough is that if survivors have been broken down so much psychologically, emotionally, mentally, that they feel they deserve the abuse or that it's their fault or that they somehow brought it on, they can have a safety plan a mile long. You can do a terrific job of safety planning, but they won't use it if they think this is their fault. And so how, again, do we broaden our safety plans to reflect that understanding and to help survivors mend emotionally? Okay, so you may have a chance to look more deeply at that another time. This is a poem by a survivor, again, reinforcing, and I know you all have heard this from your clients time and time again, that it wasn't what he did to me that hurt the most. It was the words. It's what he said to me over and over and over again. And I'm using the word he to be an offender, and I'm painting in broad strokes here, and I understand that, you know, it's not always a he offender, she victim, but I hope you'll give me a little leeway here. Yeah, I thought this was beautifully done from a survivor. Just talking about how really it was the emotional abuse. And so how are we addressing that in our safety planning? Okay, any quick questions, concerns? I lost you 3 slides back. I have a green spot on my face. I don't know. Okay. I hope you guys will let me know. You've been really great about inputting in the chat box. Okay. So we've got about 10 more minutes together. I want to go over how we can do better than just traditional safety planning. And these are some of the golden rules of safety planning. I hope that you will sign up for the second session because I've got even more tools that you can use in order to make your safety planning more productive. But let's see where we can get on this. Okay. So the first golden rule of safety planning is it's a partnership. So you may have been taught, or you may be used to kind of rapid firing suggestions at survivors and seeing kind of the reaction you get, or you taking a more assertive role in the safety planning. I would encourage you to take a back seat to the survivor in the safety planning. And to own the part of safety planning that's yours, that is crucial, that is very important, but also allow the survivor to kind of come forward and own what's theirs and control the majority of the meeting, really. So what you can bring to any safety planning situation is, again, that nice balanced nervous system of yours, because you have done your meditation and your yoga and your gardening, and so you're bringing a really kind of centered self to this. Also, your curiosity about the survivor and their situation. You know, I think oftentimes when we shut off our curiosity, we turn on our judgment. So it's easy to kind of careen into feeling judgmental about what a survivor is picking or the choices that they're making. But if we stay curious about those choices and about the survivor situation, it will help us stay client-centered and stay culturally competent about what's happening in the interaction. And then provide a safe space. So provide a comfortable space. Maybe that means you go on a walk with the survivor. Maybe it's that you're doing an activity with them. Maybe it's that you just found a really comfy couch in a quiet place. But those things are important. And then listening. So this kind of goes without saying, but I'm going to say it. It's a good reminder for me as well. And maybe particularly for me, I'm a better talker than a listener sometimes. But if you truly listen with an open heart to your client, that is your best defense against not being culturally competent or not being client-centered. If you have an open heart and you're listening and you're curious and you're humble about what you know and what you have to offer, many of those cultural divides can be overcome or bridged. Also, you know, offering connection, offering options, information, hope, and creativity. That's your piece of this. You have that, and you have that really, you know, you're having seen tens or hundreds or even thousands of survivors, and knowing their story gives you a level of expertise that survivor has only lived that life. And so she knows what's happening in her own life, but you've seen how this plays out over time. And again, sometimes that can push you to want to be very directive in your client interactions. But I would encourage you to see it as a resource that you have that you can offer somebody who doesn't have that background. But again, that you're allowing them to choose. And then lastly, within a safety planning session, anything you can do to enhance your healing relationship with the client. So you should end your safety planning, not necessarily on a high note. I understand that this isn't, you know, it can be a very somber conversation, but you should leave with a better connection with your client than when you started. If you end the session and you feel a bigger rift between the two of you, that's a problem. And that would be something to reflect on. You should be more closely allied at the end of this session, because that relationship, that healing relationship and connection with you is maybe the most important thing that survivor has going for them. And maybe the most important thing that comes out of safety planning is just that you're a closer ally to them, even if your safety strategies don't work. Even if you did your best listening, the survivor did their best at guessing what will work, but some of it doesn't work. If you're closer to your client, that will allow for more meaningful safety planning and more meaningful relationship in the future. So then the survivor gets to pick the safety strategies. We've talked about this. You talk less. This is really probably me talking to myself, because I would find myself talking a lot with the survivors, and really it needs to be their talking and with some input from you. And sharing your expertise, we talked about that. And then this idea that safety planning is not a one and done. It's not something you do one time and then you pack it away and you're done. You know, you choose a few safety strategies together and see how they go. And then, you know, come back a week later or a couple weeks later and ask how it's going, and you tweak them, and maybe you try something else. But I don't think we shouldn't give a survivor the expectation that these things will work 100%, or that there won't be more need for more safety planning in the future. And so here's some other kind of golden rules of safety planning. And we've gone over some of this. So I want to end this particular session with a few COVID-19 specific safety planning strategies. And one is, you know, survivors may not feel comfortable coming to shelter. So how are we offering strategies that acknowledge that and don't pressure them to do that? Needing to update our resource list. There are some resources that are not being offered in our communities anymore, and we don't want to be, you know, offering resources that they can't make good on. If the offender is in the house, can your organization get up and going on telehealth, text, chat options? You know, having that connection to survivors during this time is super important. When are survivors allowed to leave the house such that they can be making communication with you? Can you be ferreting that out during your crisis calls with them? Being honest about the environment at your shelter. So if you were to have the virus at your shelter, how are you just being honest with folks and letting them know what's happening at your shelter? And we've done these things before. I worked at a shelter that had bed bugs, and I know it's a different deal, but it's similar in that we were just super honest. And some survivors decided to come in and some did not. But we were very real with them, and it didn't end the conversation. We kept talking to them. And then what kind of flexibility do you have with your services during this time of crisis to make the space necessary for folks to have the time they need to heal and stay safe? So I know these are just, you know, a few ideas to lob at you here at the end of the PowerPoint, and I really appreciate y'all's time and attention and what you're doing and what you're giving to the world right now. I'm going to kind of shift to our last slide, and I really encourage you to join us again at 12:30. I'd love to be able to give you some more strategies. So thank you so much. If there's any kind of last minute question, I'm here. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Oh, good. I'm glad. I'm glad y'all are still out there. It's a little lonely to be talking to this computer. Oh, by the way, guys, I wrote a book. That's my book on the screen. Take good care. Very nice. Y'all be safe. Teresa, maybe if you want to put the email in again. I have somebody asking how they sign up for the afternoon. They might be interested in the link.
Of course, I'll put it in one more time and you can just email me. I've had a couple of emails already. Just email me at Terry, TERRY, at nmpadv.org. Just shoot me an email and I will get that over to you and attach the registration link for the second session.
Terrific. And my book's on Amazon. That really has my best thoughts on safety planning. I went back and read it. That's when you know you're old, when you have to go back and read your own darn book. And then I do offer some consulting services if y'all are interested. And thank you again. It's an honor to be a part of seeing if I can help.
And also a reminder, we are currently recording this session. We will also be recording the second session. So just in case you can't make it, no worries, we have recorded it. My email is Terry, TERRY, at nmcadv.org. Yeah, so the second session will be following this one. Yes, it's the second
And
part.
it starts at 12:30 today and goes for another hour and a half. I'm going to go have some caffeine.
Alrighty, if it's okay with you, Kristen, I'll go ahead and end this, and we'll see everybody at 12:30. It's at 12:30, Marcia.
Yeah, 12:30. Great. Thank you so much, Teresa.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.